Good morning, everyone. We'll get started. I know we do have, I believe another committee meeting starts after us today, so I think they want us to be done on time. So we'll call the meeting to order. My name is Peter Millibar. I'm the MLA for Kamloops Centre and Chair of the Select Standing Committee on Public Accounts. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people known as the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations. And this morning we will be considering the Office of the Auditor General's report titled Child Care Licensing Capacity, and this report actually has two different chapters, so we'll be considering each chapter individually. So with Chapter 1, I would like to welcome the Acting Auditor General Sheila Dobbs to the meeting and turn it over to her for the office's presentation on Chapter 1 of the report.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. The Office of the Auditor General acknowledges that we live and work with gratitude and respect on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge that our office is located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples, of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Our report on child care licensing capacity actually combines two audits, and as the Chair noted, each audit has its own chapter, and we're going to be presenting them to you individually. I have the members of the team with me this morning. So I have Laura Hatt, the Assistant Auditor General for our Performance Audit Group, Lisa Sevigny, who's a Director in our Performance Audit Group, Julianne King, a Senior Performance Auditor, who will actually lead the presentation on the first audit, Chapter 1, and Emily Benoit, a Senior Performance Auditor, who will lead our presentation on the second audit, Chapter 2. First, I'll just review why we did these audits. In 2018, the provincial government introduced the Child Care BC Plan, its 10-year strategy to create more access to affordable quality childcare. Since the release of the plan, the provincial and federal governments have funded 39,000 new childcare spaces. About 31,000 more spaces are expected by 2028. To keep up with growth, the Child Care BC Plan includes a commitment to increase capacity in health authorities to license new spaces, conduct investigations, and monitor compliance. This commitment is at the center of both of the audits. Implementing this commitment requires cooperations from several entities, given how childcare planning, funding, and operations are governed in this province. In BC, the Ministry of Education and Childcare is responsible for childcare planning and funding and leads implementation of the Childcare BC Plan. However, childcare licensing falls to the Ministry of Health and the 5 regional health authorities. Our first audit looked at how the Ministry of Education and Childcare worked with key partners, the Ministry of Health and the health authorities, to implement the commitment to increase capacity in health authorities' licensing programs. And Julianne King will now tell you about what we looked for and what we found in that first audit of the Ministry of Education and Childcare.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and committee members. Thank you for your interest in our audit of the Ministry of Education and Childcare, which we tabled on February 27th, 2025. This is the first audit in the report, which looks at the ministry's efforts to increase the capacity of childcare licensing programs by working with its health partners. I'll be walking you through the information in the audit at a glance, which provides a summary of the audit topic, our key findings, and related recommendations. You can find this information on page 5 of the report. The objective for this audit was to determine whether the Ministry of Education and Childcare had effectively worked with health partners, the Ministry of Health and the 5 regional health authorities, to implement the commitment in the Child Care BC Plan to increase capacity in health authorities to license new spaces, conduct investigations, and monitor compliance in childcare facilities. Our audit found that the ministry hadn't coordinated with the Ministry of Health or regional health authorities to establish expectations for implementing the commitment. The ministry hadn't defined roles and responsibilities or established timelines and targets for implementing the commitment, and it hadn't established how the commitment would be funded. Responsibility over childcare transitioned from the Ministry of Children and Family Development to the Ministry of Education and Childcare in April 2022. But the ministry's first meeting with health partners to discuss the commitment was not until May 2024. We also found that the ministry didn't monitor or report publicly on the implementation of the commitment. It hadn't confirmed whether health authorities had plans to increase capacity or obtained reporting from health partners on the commitment. It also hadn't identified or managed risks related to achieving the commitment. As a result, we found that the Ministry of Education and Childcare did not know whether health authorities had increased their capacity to license, monitor, and investigate childcare facilities in BC. We made 5 recommendations to the ministry to coordinate with health partners to document expectations for increasing capacity in the health authorities' childcare licensing programs and to monitor and report on progress. We're pleased to note that the ministry has accepted these recommendations. Thank you, and I'll now pass it back to the Acting Auditor General.
Thank you, Julianne. So that completes our presentation. I'd just like to, on behalf of the team, extend our appreciation to the staff in the Ministry of Education and Childcare throughout this audit. And we're prepared to answer questions when it's convenient.
Okay, thanks. Before we get into questions, we'll hear from the ministry as well, but does the Controller General have anything to add? No? All right, so we'll turn it over to the ministry and then we'll jump into questions for either or. So, yeah.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and Committee. Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Kay Krishna. I'm the Deputy Minister of Education and Childcare. Pleased to be joining you here today. I want to also start by acknowledging that we are joining today's committee meeting from the unceded traditional territory at the Lekwungen-speaking people, known today as the Esquimalt and the Songhees First Nations, and it's with gratitude that we're able to convene here on these beautiful lands. I'd also like to start by introducing our team. I'm joined by several ADMs, Patty Boyle from Childcare, Ross Hayward and Ali Butler from Health. I'm also joined today by Executive Directors Sue Bedford from Health, Teresa Butler, Hugo Ballinger, it says Butler, but it's Ballinger, and Claire Cronin from our childcare team. I'd also like to thank the Auditor General and team for their partnership and work on this important audit. So licensing is an integral part of the Childcare BC plan, as you've probably seen in the report. Our 10-year roadmap is to ensure that childcare is affordable and accessible and is a core service that families can rely on all across BC. We've made significant progress in our childcare sector in only a few years' time, and we're on track to meet the commitments under our agreement with our government, with the Government of Canada. Thanks to our accelerated space creation programs, the province has funded more than 40,000 new childcare spaces in just under 8 years, with more than 23,000 of these spaces already serving families. The remainder are work in progress. Part of the plan includes expanding childcare licensing, monitoring, and reporting, which is coordinated with regional health authorities through the Ministry of Health. And as this work of the Office of the Auditor General, this is the work that the Auditor General has examined and is the focus of the audit. I appreciate the importance of the work of the Auditor General's office and all of the value that it brings to all of us to help us continue to improve the services that we provide. And we find the feedback very valuable, so thank you. In this case, the audit report identifies areas where we could be doing a better job coordinating between our ministries, the Ministry of Education and Childcare and the Ministry of Health. And the coordination is essential to ensure that there are resources available to local health authorities to expand licensing capacity that is accurate, aligns with data, and the feedback can flow between ministries on how we continue to adapt and evolve as we grow the childcare sector. The central question of the audit was whether or not the commitments and mandates for both ministries were being met. The report lays out a series of recommendations which present a framework to allow the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education and Childcare to work together in a better way to meet our commitments going forward. We accept the recommendations in the audit and are in the process of implementing them. And our presentation today will provide more information on the status of the work and our plan and our timeline moving forward. And so I'd like to, again, thank the committee for the opportunity to present today on the report. And I want to reassure not just the committee, but the families and the child care providers all across the province that we're taking action to ensure that licensing, monitoring, and investigation services are available in every health authority across BC. So thanks again for your attention. I'm going to pass it to Patty Boyle, our ADM for childcare, who will walk us through the presentation this morning on behalf of the ministries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kay, and good morning, everyone. As Kay mentioned, I'm Patty Boyle. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for Childcare, and I'm pleased to be here today to outline our response to the report on childcare licensing capacity by the Office of the Auditor General. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today on the territory of the Lekwungen peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and I'm grateful to be able to live and work on these beautiful lands. So we have a slide deck. I'm going to move on to slide 2 now if you're following along. The presentation will outline the results of the audit and the ministry's actions to address the recommendations. And on to slide 3. So the 10-year Childcare BC plan is government's plan to build a future where access to affordable, quality, and inclusive childcare is a core service that families can rely on. The plan is centered around 3 pillars: affordability, access, and quality. And part of the access pillar is the commitment to enhance the capacity of health authorities to keep up with demand of new licensed spaces. As you can see on the slide, if you're following along, responsibility for achieving this goal is split between the Ministry of Education and Childcare and the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Education and Childcare is responsible for administering the Early Learning and Childcare Act and the Early Learning and Childcare Act regulations. We're also responsible for administering grants and benefits to providers and parents, and regulating the early childhood educator workforce and the post-secondary early childhood educator programs. The Ministry of Health is responsible for licensing that falls under the Community Care and Assisted Living Act and child care licensing regulation. And that also includes monitoring, assessing, and investigating licensed child care facilities to assess compliance with the Act. So in the 2019-2021, this is on slide 4, 2021 and 2022 budgets for Childcare BC, increased funding for licensing officers was included. In April of 2022, the Child Care Division was moved to the Ministry of Education, which became the Ministry of Education and Childcare. The on-the-ground responsibilities around the licensing of care facilities in specific communities remained with local health authorities. The Ministry of Education and Childcare's Child Care Division continues to use provincial and federal funding to invest in childcare funding, including fee reductions for preschool and school-age childcare, expanding $10 a day Childcare BC spaces, increased wages for early childhood educators by $2 per hour, bringing the total wage enhancement for early childhood educators up to $6 per hour, and over $512 million in new childcare project funding, creating 14,450 childcare spaces, and that's just since 2022 to reflect the scope of this audit. But since the start of Childcare BC plan in 2018, we funded over 40,000 new spaces through our space creation programs, with over 23,000 of those spaces operational. And so if we move on to the next slide, the Office of the Auditor General had 2 key findings. The first finding was the Ministry of Education and Childcare did not effectively partner with health authorities to document expectations for increasing local capacity, and the finding that there's been a lack of monitoring, reporting, and oversight on how health authority partners have been implementing their commitment to childcare licensing. Our ministry has accepted all 5 recommendations, as we've mentioned, and we're on track to implement this fiscal year. So if we go on to slide 6, the first recommendation that the Office of the Auditor General had was to work with health partners to document expectations for implementing the commitment to increase the capacity of health authorities to license, monitor, and investigate childcare facilities, including identifying roles and responsibilities, objectives, timelines, and targets, and how the commitment will be funded. While the audit was in progress, the Ministry of Education and Childcare worked with our Ministry of Health colleagues to establish a cross-ministry committee to document much of the existing coordination that our ministries already did together, and to achieve our respective legislative requirements. The terms of reference for that committee define each ministry's roles and responsibilities as follows. So the Ministry of Education and Childcare will be responsible for sharing information to support future planning, reporting, and supporting funding requests, and other requests from the Ministry of Health as needed. And the Ministry of Health, being responsible to monitor health authorities, including coordinating to establish targets and timelines, monitoring health authority performance, communicating funding needs, and seeking funding as and when needed. We're in the process of formulating a memorandum of understanding to guide how our ministries will work together, and an information sharing agreement to guide how information shared between our ministries, health authorities, is used, safeguarded, and shared where appropriate. So we're in the process of implementing that, and we're on track to ensure that we do all of this by the end of the current fiscal year. And on to the next slide. So the second recommendation was for the Ministry of Education and Childcare to work with health partners to ensure health authorities develop plans to increase capacity to license, monitor, and investigate childcare facilities that are aligned with existing and anticipating growth in childcare spaces. Here again, we accept this recommendation, and we're taking the following actions to ensure it's also implemented this fiscal year. The Ministry of Health will ensure health authorities develop plans to align licensed officer capacity with the current and anticipated number of childcare spaces within their regions, and the Ministry of Education and Childcare will support this by providing the Ministry of Health advance information on regional anticipated growth in childcare spaces. These efforts are currently underway and are on track as well for 25-26. So if you move to the next slide, the remaining three recommendations are to improve monitoring of progress against timelines and targets, to identify and mitigate risks, and to publicly report on progress. These recommendations have all been accepted, and the following steps are being taken. So the Ministry of Health will gather data from health authorities, monitor that progress against targets and timelines, and establish the regional plans. A joint risk register will be developed by both ministries, and our ministry will release annual public reports on government's progress to implement the Childcare BC plan as per Section 6 of the Early Learning and Childcare Act. The first report is scheduled to be released in December 1st, 2025. So these actions are in progress and are on track for implementation in 25-26. And on to the summary slide then, the last slide. In summary, the Office of the Auditor General's review and the report highlighted that we could be doing more to formalize, document, and coordinate the strong working relationships our ministries have to uphold our legislative requirements. And as such, we've established a key cross-ministry committee, and among other things, this committee will secure that the recommendations are implemented, as I've just described, by the end of the fiscal year. We thank the Office of the Auditor General for its review and the valuable insights it's provided to strengthen childcare licensing coordination, planning, monitoring, and reporting capacity. And with that, we'll just go to the last slide, and that's just a question slide for any that you might have for us today.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll jump right in. Larry, you had a question?
With respect to the timelines, I did hear that, excuse me, that we're looking at having implementation finished by the end of this fiscal year. What type of, if any, key performance indicators, or how would we track the quality of these follow-ups and how they're being implemented?
Yeah, so, yeah, sorry, were you wanting to respond? Okay. Yeah, I can respond to that. So with our cross-ministry committee, we will be able to set those targets for the health authorities, work together on ensuring that they're implemented, and bringing that information back from the health authorities to our table to be able to look at those KPIs, to be able to respond into whether we think, we need more information. And together we'll be able to do that as two ministries together.
I'd also like to add.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
Please
okay.
go ahead.
Thanks. Just to add to ADM Boyle's response, we also have regular dialogue with childcare providers, and so there will be opportunities for feedback loops as we look at how we're publishing the KPIs and having ongoing dialogue with the sector. So we'll have an opportunity to make sure that the KPIs that we're looking at and measuring are relevant, and we can adapt as we go if needed.
Okay. Would this committee have access to those KPIs?
Yes.
Sorry, when you touched on the, what was it, over 40,000, did you say funded spaces or open or?
New spaces.
New spaces? So, this is, I think, part of the frustration out there in terms of, and a lot of this report is about, the last recommendation was around transparency and reporting out. Numbers get bandied about that never quite mesh. So 40,000 new spaces to the public would sound like there's space for 40,000 kids currently. Yet your next sentence was 23,000 are operational, which means 43% aren't. So when will those 43% actually see kids in a space?
So the 40,000 space are new spaces that have been built since 2018. Those 23,000 are in the build stage, and as soon as they're finished building, some of them will be in a year from now, some of them will be in a couple years from now, those will then be accepting children as well into their facilities. But we do have 159,000 spaces in all of BC. These are just our new spaces in the last few years. So since 2018, 40,000 new spaces. And I think we're above that right now. But I'll just look down to my colleagues and see if they have anything more to add on space creation in that number.
Hi, committee, thank you. My name is Claire Cronin. I'm actually Executive Director, and I have responsibility for our childcare capital funding programs. And what ADM Boyle says is correct. It does take time to create new spaces. I think in that sector, we're still seeing some fallout from pandemic, and spaces take time to build. But they're all, hopefully, will be completed by about 2028, the additional spaces.
Okay, and then on slide 6 of your presentation, it's accepted for targets and timelines to be established by the end of fiscal 25-26, which would be March 31st next year. Yet on slide 10, we are supposed to be getting a report that is actually on December of this year, supposed to be tying into reporting out on how you're doing meeting targets and timelines. So how can we have a report with any accuracy in December when the targets and timelines aren't even going to be established until likely March?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the targets and timelines are for our committee that is meeting, but the public reporting is through the Early Learning and Childcare Act, and it's come into force in 2024, and so that's a new reporting. We also have our Canada-wide early learning and childcare action plans and our reports are in every year. So this is just a new report that's reporting on the Childcare BC plan, 10-year plan overall. And we'll start posting that in December 2025, and that's required, as I mentioned, under the Early Learning and Childcare Act. This report is going to include key licensing indicators, including the number of new spaces, licensing capacity, and compliance rate. And our annual reporting will track key licensing indicators, including number of new spaces, licensing capacity, and compliance data, ensuring full transparency. The committee will help us to work better together. This reporting is required under our new Early Learning and Childcare Act. I'll just check and see if anybody else has anything to add.
Stephanie?
Thank you. Thank you for the work. I just want to thank the Auditor General for the work you did on the report. It's important. I also want to acknowledge that this is, the largest rollout of childcare in BC's history. And so there's always going to be growth and room for growth. As a parent who missed this bubble, I'm deeply appreciative of the efforts that are being taken to ensure that, more families can have both parents in the workforce. And so my overall view of this report is really what we're looking at is, do we have the infrastructure and necessary supports in place to, properly support this plan? It's good to have a plan, but then we've got to have all the parts that make the plan go. And this is one part of the infrastructure. It's not all of it. It's one part of a very massive program. And so one of my questions is, perhaps it's around recommendation 2 and future licensing needs. But what I didn't see in here, and you can tell me if this is out of order, is really around, it was slide 3, but also on page 23 of the report that outlines key responsibilities. And I'm wondering who's responsible for doing an overall scan to project needs in areas to make sure that we're putting childcare in spaces into areas that need them. I think there's a public perception that it's an application-based process, which of course it is, but who's making sure that when we get applications that they're being processed in areas that they're needed?
Thank you for the question. I'll start and then I'll pass it to Claire to provide follow-up response. So it is an application-based process, you're correct. But part of the review and the weighting process looks at need, such as childcare deserts or other opportunities, areas of growth, projected growth, to rank and look at the applications and try to prioritize areas of need. Claire, would you like to add?
No, I actually think you covered that very well. It is part of our weighting process to look at where we have some lower coverage rates and really target our efforts to those lower coverage rates.
Okay. Can I just have a quick follow-up? So just clarifying, so people can apply, but behind the scenes, it's your job to make sure that you're processing applications in areas of need. So what is the process to determine the areas of need?
So that becomes, it's a forecasting and a modeling. We have a team that does forecasting and modeling and looks at that natural sector growth as well as where we have funded previously. That's another big thing. The New Spaces Fund has been targeting those larger projects since 2018. So we do look at the distribution over time as well as the natural growth in the sector to determine the coverage rate.
If I may add, since childcare has moved into the Ministry of Education, now the Ministry of Education and Childcare, there's also been a concerted effort to expand on with school districts, and so that's much more of a kind of a broad brush coverage ratio by working with all 61 districts across the province to find opportunities to expand in each of the areas, and so it's a little bit more of the on-the-ground planning and forecasting with the districts, but there's an opportunity there as we move forward to continue to look at integration with school districts and more on the ground planning with them as well. So that's going forward.
Okay, so this just brought up one more question and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues. You talked about the school district work. You talked about assessing where childcare has been. There's a difference between public and private, and we have, private childcare providers in communities, but we also have this real effort to have childcare on school grounds because of the natural synergies that provides for families. How are we making sure that as we push for school districts to do this or to provide childcare on school grounds, because they're not all operated by school districts, some of them are their contracts, how are we making sure that there's not an oversaturation in area if there's between the private and either school districts or publicly run or funded ones?
Are you able to answer?
I can speak to that. So currently the New Spaces Fund, the eligibility criteria is for our public sector, not-for-profit, and district partners. We do have some space creation funding available through startup grants for private operators as well. And we do look at auspice when we're looking at that balancing. There's a whole priority matrix that's put into decision-making. So we look at those different saturation rates in terms of age groupings as well as how we're distributing that funding province-wide to create as many spaces as possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Kyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General for taking on this work, and thank you to the Ministry of Education and Childcare for accepting the recommendations and looking through this very thoughtfully. And also to the Ministry of Health, obviously, for looking at this. Licensing is an important part of making sure that we do have safe childcare spaces, that they're properly run. It is an important component of it. Just maybe a question to the Auditor General, and I want to focus on recommendation number 4. And it's around identifying, monitoring, and mitigating risks. And I'm wondering if the Auditor General could elaborate at all on the types of risks they considered in making this recommendation.
Thank you for the question, member. So we looked at, childcare is an important area. It's a huge topic. And as we've heard from the Ministry of Education and Childcare. And so we had to figure out where could we best use our resources. And what we ended up focusing on was the licensing capacity. And that was really part of the risk. The risk of having 2 ministries with that coordinated responsibility. And there are challenges when you have your own portfolios to be delivering. And so it was just an area that was not included, I think, in the federal provincial child care plan. So there was not going to be regular monitoring and reporting as part of that agreement. But it was such a critical area. So in terms of the risk piece, it was, the risk of not having the capacity to be licensing in a timely way when you have that much growth in the sector, and to be able to have the staff to do those inspections, because it really comes down to the safety and quality of childcare. I'm just going to see if my colleagues would like to add anything. Lisa, would you have anything to add to that recommendation?
No, you answered that beautifully.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you to the Auditor General for the response. And I think that also kind of brings back to obviously recommendation number 2, and ensuring that health authorities develop the plans to ensure there is that capacity. But I guess in developing the plans, there still is the funding challenge within the health authorities. So I'm wondering if maybe perhaps the Ministry of Health could respond to developing plans from the ministry side is one thing, but do the health authorities actually have the ability within their budget to actually implement the licensing changes that are required here if we're going to accept the recommendations?
Thanks for the question. Ross Hayward, I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister, currently of Substance Use Treatment and Recovery. I just moved portfolios, and Ali Butler, my colleague, is now in the role of taking this over. But I'll speak to this the best that I can. Certainly, and you'll hear through Stephen Chong that will be speaking for VCH later, but with the health authorities, they are certainly looking at what their capacity needs are around licensing. As far as the KPIs that they're going to be collecting through our joint work and our group that we have with our partners now in education, we're looking with health authorities to actually do some very clear work on identifying how many actual FTEs that we are needed if there's a shortfall. Based on that, then of course our group will not have that ability to say if there's extra funding needed or the health authority says we don't have funding. That'll be a process we'll have to take through the regular channel through government to get application for that funding. However, I can say certainly that the health authorities right now with their existing staffing always prioritize health and safety as the first thing, and the actual licensing of new child care facilities. So if they need to prioritize their current staff to meet the needs of licensing new facilities, that's what they will do. They'll prioritize their staff for that, and of course the health and safety aspects of it. So, I can't clearly say where the shortfall is. This is part of the work that we're doing right now. If there's a shortfall of the staffing in the health authorities and any required funding that may be required for that, health authorities do have a budget under their global budget to do that hiring, but we haven't got any details from them yet as to will there be a shortfall.
Thank you for the response. And I guess in terms of, I'm sure that work will continue, but in terms of the licensing work that is happening, I guess how much currently is that dedicated to, I think I heard there are 159,000 spaces currently total in the province. So how much of that is currently fully allocated to, the private license and nonprofit versus the Child Care BC spaces, I guess? Is there sort of any separation of duties, or are they kind of intertwined between the licensing officers?
Maybe if I could just jump in though, because I don't want to get ahead to
Sure.
the health
Sure, yeah.
presentation.
Yeah.
So if it's a licensing specific,
Okay,
we'll
I can
maybe
ask a
hold that
different
to
question.
the,
I can ask a different question. Thank you,
just so
Mr.
they can do
Chair.
their presentation first before we,
Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe going back to recommendation number 4 on the risk register, I'm wondering to the Deputy Minister of Education and Childcare if you could provide any update on, has that work of the risk register started? And I guess if so, are there any risks that are currently being looked at that are going to be included in that you could share today?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll defer to our ADM who's actually helping to chair the committee that's involved in more of the detailed work.
So as I've mentioned in the presentation, the work has started just in looking at how we can develop our memorandum of understanding together and how we can look at information sharing so that we can get that information from the health authorities and bring that into our table to talk about, what risks we might be seeing with that information that comes in. So risk register yet to be developed once we've developed those first documents together.
Thank you for the response, and certainly just the risks that I would foresee, obviously the funding risk for the health authorities being one, but we've talked about the capacity risk already, but also just the sort of risk of making sure that we have adequate for all types of childcare options, not simply the childcare BC spaces, but for other options that parents may want to choose. So if there are private licensing, making sure that that's adequate. So just wanted to put that out there, make sure that there is some sort of consideration in the risk register for ensuring that capacity. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that's all I have for questions.
Now, after saying we'll stay away from licensing for the time being, I do have a question, but it's more about the work that's supposed to be happening in terms of health and education working together or figuring out a path forward. So I actually had a meeting with a child care provider in my riding in Kamloops last week. They were turned down for new spaces funding. It would have actually been for health authority employees. They were trying to work with the health authority. It still gets turned down. Second time they've been turned down, even though they're existing operator. A lot of problems with what they were asked to provide and changing goalposts. And I've heard the same actually from the city of Kamloops in terms of their application for a city-operated childcare space. So there's a lot of need out there, and these applications are getting rejected because of oversubscription or things of that nature. But one of the things that's starting to come out, at least in an interior health realm, is you have now a want for more square footage per child, yet new spaces funding that won't really cover, lease space is lease space. And so if you have to add an extra doubling of square footage per child, that's an added cost to your lease space. Where are we at if licensing and education still aren't even talking with each other currently, if we're all waiting for MOUs and everything else to get into place for another year almost? That seems like it's going to continue to drag and or create situations where the left hand and the right hand again are making demands that either the money or one side or the other isn't connecting. That's making some sense. So where are we at with that cooperation in terms of who's actually driving the bus here on childcare? Because it seems like both ministries are still kind of working at cross purposes at times.
I'll start and then pass to the team. What I would say is that our teams are working together on a regular basis on the ground and coordinating operationally. And the work continues in response to this audit to formalize and improve the information sharing and the tracking and the monitoring in a much more structured way. And that's really what the audit has helped us find and put more structure and process in place. And get access to more information sharing across ministries and with the health authority, et cetera. So the work continues on the ground while our teams are working on continuous process improvement to add those more formalized structures. I'll ask my team to continue to provide support on that.
Okay. Yeah, and I wouldn't want the committee to get the opinion or the wrong idea that we aren't working together and we're just starting work together. We have worked together regularly on priorities since the transition to education and childcare. So when we came over from MCFD to education and childcare, and we were working well before that as well. But some of the initiatives that we've worked on together, and one of them you touched on just in terms of space, is the development, for example, of the design guidelines, the new design guidelines we have. These guidelines aren't intended to replace legislative framework, but they provide information on planning quality childcare projects where the legislation is silent, and to encourage exceeding minimum standards where possible. So health was a critical part of the working group, and health authorities were consulted on the guidelines several times before the release of those design guidelines. We also have what you might have heard out in community called child care resource and referral programs, and they report into the Ministry of Education and Childcare. We fund those programs, and they actually have a health authority and Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education and Childcare working group. They've had that since April of 2023. That group works to strengthen the working relationships between community care facility licensing programs and the child care resource and referral centers to support the expansion of quality, inclusive, and affordable licensed childcare throughout the province. So they work together well, and we also have what we called early learning, community, and care leads within the school districts. They all work together. So there's been quite a bit of work done in that area. And our policy divisions that have worked together with health authorities on both the School Act. So health's been at the table for talking about the School Act, and when we've made changes there, and the child care licensing regulations amendments in 2020 and 2021. And we continue to meet with health authorities and the Ministry of Health on an ad hoc basis. So as Claire Cronin was mentioning, we are constantly going out and meeting with health authorities to talk about New Spaces Fund and to exchange ideas there. So as Kay said, as Deputy Minister Kay said, we are just more formalizing those meetings that we do already have. And I think, working groups, we have conferences, so the licensing officer symposium and working groups in 2023, as an example, was something that our staff attended and had breakout rooms and talked about things that we could do better together. We presented on initiatives like the New Spaces Fund and all of the other initiatives that we have on the go right now.
Okay, thank you. Nina?
Thank you so much to all the presenters. And affordable, accessible, quality childcare is so critical for working families, and the work done to increase spaces and reduce costs has been really appreciated by residents in my riding of Victoria Swan Lake, and I know far beyond. We know there's a lot more work to do as well, and I appreciate the work of the Auditor General on this report. And it's noted that BC is the only jurisdiction where there is the distinction and the split between the licensing and is separate from the planning and funding. And many of the gaps identified in this audit stem from that decentralized model. So just a couple questions. One quite big picture. Are there any insights to be gleaned from other jurisdictions that are not decentralized that could be helpful for us to consider in the BC context? And now that the cross-ministry committee is a key body to advance recommendations, is the committee able to access the terms of reference for that committee?
Yeah. So, go ahead. Okay. So I think obviously, we would like to see what other jurisdictions are doing, and we have done a lot of research on other jurisdictions. I think in terms of us being the only ones where licensing is separated, we definitely could learn a lot and do that work together. So I think up until now, that work's been done individually, but we could certainly do that work together to see what we could bring to that in a more robust way. I would just also maybe look to my colleagues to see if there's anything else they want to add to that. But in the terms of reference, I think definitely we can share those with this committee. We've done a lot of work on them already, and that's been we meet quarterly, and that's been some of what we've been doing to look at what else do we need to add in. As we're doing those terms of reference, we think to ourselves, oh, we should probably invite someone else to this committee. So for example, at the last committee, we invited somebody who wanted to talk more about the Indigenous lens and how we could bring that to this committee as well. So we added to the terms of reference in that piece and making sure that we had a connection from health back to our tripartite member of understanding that we've developed with FNLC and the Government of Canada. So that venue just allows us to bring those things back. So I'll just look down and see if Teresa has anything to add. You might have.
Great. No, thanks, Patty. I'm Teresa Butler. I'm the Executive Director for Childcare Policy with the Ministry of Education and Childcare. The one thing I would add would be that the separation of responsibility with medical health officers holding accountability for the inspection and the licensing and the health and safety of these facilities, they are one step removed from any funding decisions or allocations that are being made through the Ministry of Education and Childcare. It gives them a level of independence in terms of the recommendations that they are making, and I think provides a second layer of sort of support or protection for the people and the children that are in those programs, so that we know that the recommendations are not being influenced by any kind of funding decisions or allocations, and that they are independent of that. So that's just one aspect I would like to add. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions, Stephanie?
Thanks. Excuse me. It's around inclusion and accessibility for childcare, and sort of back to my making sure that we have, the right spaces in the right places for the right folks. Whose job in these key responsibilities is it to make sure that while we have the right number of childcare spaces being put into the right communities, we also make sure that we have the right levels of supports to make sure that neurodiverse kids have equal access, to make sure that children who are hard of hearing have equal access and supports. Whose responsibility is it between the two entities here?
I'll start with that. Thank you for the question. Inclusivity is a critical pillar of Childcare BC, and I'll turn to the team to give some examples of the work that we've done. But a number of our programs really focus on ensuring inclusivity across all childcares, and our policies really have been evolving to focus on inclusivity. So it's a part of our policy and program and funding model, less so on the side of the licensing, although health can speak to what they may look for from a licensing point of view or the authorities, but it's really part of our program design and is built in and inherent in all of the work that we are doing across all childcare funding and spaces.
Yeah, I'll just add in that we've got a lot of disparate funding models because, childcare's been around for a long period of time, but we're working on an operating funding model right now, which brings all of those funding models in together. And one of the things that we're looking at in there is what is the need for inclusion and how can we fund that within that operating funding model. And so we have about 70 providers in that funding model right now, and they're bringing forward what the needs for inclusion are and how we should be looking at that together. And it's kind of a test that we'll be able to take back to government, to cabinet, to talk about. And we have a Treasury Board check-in on that, on the operating funding model, so that we can look at things like inclusion and how we're providing funding for that. Also in our $10 a day program, all of the providers must have an inclusion policy, in order to be a $10 a day provider. So those are a couple instances where we really do require the provider to have an inclusion strategy. Anything you want to add to that, Teresa?
Thank you so much for the question, and I would also add to Patty's comments that the Ministry of Education and Childcare released an inclusive childcare strategy last June. That's a public document and outlines some of the cross-ministry work underway to take a look at providing more inclusive, accessible childcare spaces for all children and families. And we will be reporting publicly on the progress under that strategy, so more to come on that.
Thanks. I'm just going to take it drill it down a little further, if that's okay on this. I guess I'm looking for some specifics. This is about capacity, on licensing and inspection services, but also capacity to provide the service as needed. And so my wonder is, so early childhood educators, for instance, in a community, health has the data to know that there are 10 children in the community that are deaf and hard of hearing. Parents who have children who are deaf and hard of hearing are walking into childcare centers and having a hard time accessing childcare for their children who are deaf and hard of hearing because we don't have early childhood educators who are also trained to support these kids. So what are we doing when we get down to the ground level to actually provide the support to make sure in our capacity planning that we're able to ensure accessibility as barrier-free as possible for parents who have children with diverse needs in our capacity planning?
Thanks for the detailed follow-up. No, appreciate it. I think there's probably more we can do to coordinate the actual planning and understanding the needs from a health point of view and from any data that may exist around that. I would say that part of what we're doing is trying to build capacity for inclusivity training for all ECEs and looking at curriculum and opportunities for that. Part of this is part of our strategy as we're rolling it out. So we're evolving our programs, our capacity training for the workforce, and I think there's probably some opportunity that we can take from your question to think about how we can build that into information sharing that goes above and beyond licensing, but around projected need for individual families and community. Thanks.
Just maybe following up on the whole, especially the neurodiverse side, the system does not serve the individual well. And when we talk inclusivity, because it is very much around the institutional including kids into an actual physical daycare. And so I'll give you another example that needs to be reconsidered in terms of flexibility, because these are children that need flexible solutions. Again, I have a constituent that I met with, his child, neurodiverse, tried 2 different daycares. Both of them just couldn't accommodate the child based on the child's needs. Both were subsidized childcare spaces. Yet for them to bring someone into their home to try to provide that same care for the child on a regular basis, they don't qualify for any subsidy. They're not asking for the whole thing to be paid. They were asking for the same subsidy they would have got if they were in a physical daycare space to be provided to them, and they would pay the difference for whatever it costs them to get that proper support for their child. That's not flexibility in a childcare situation. That's forcing one of the 2 parents to not work anymore. Yet if you somehow shoehorn a child into a setting that's not appropriate for the child or the other children in that space, the government will provide some funding for it, the $900 a month or whatever it is. So there needs to be a broader look as you're working through your policies here with health and with yourselves as to the special, unique needs that a lot of these families actually have to actually truly benefit the child versus, what the goal may be great to have inclusivity in every center, but that doesn't work for every child to be in that setting. And so, these are the real world implications. And so, when Stephanie mentions things about need in a community, I'm at a loss to find a community that doesn't have need for childcare. And a ranking, my own family, my wife stopped working to look after our grandchildren because there was no childcare spaces in Kamloops to access. So like the need is real out there, and the lack of flexibility and the lack of moving forward with these new spaces and the timelines is becoming, you know, the problem hasn't gone away anywhere, I guess is what I'm saying. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. That's my soapbox or advocacy for my constituent there, but it is very real. Like I say, there needs to start being a more logical flow for these families to understand why if I send my child across the street from my house, I can get funding, but if I leave the child in my home and hire somebody in to provide that more specialized care that child needs, there suddenly isn't funding, even at the same level of dollar figure.
Yeah.
Right? So, any other questions before we move to the next? And I recognize when Health, once you're done your presentation, there might be a lot of overlap at that point of the questions. So hopefully Education's able to stick around as well till the end of the meeting. So with that, then we'll move on to Chapter 2 and the more health-related side of the report.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to acknowledge the work that the ministry is doing and the proactive response to the recommendations and the timeline, and that, you know, it's really putting that structure around the relationship so expectations are clear and there is the ability to monitor, and really appreciate the effort. Our second audit, which is the second chapter of the report, looks at the childcare licensing capacity in the context of one regional health authority. And we chose to look at the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority because it serves a large population, has a significant number of childcare spaces and facilities, and includes both urban and rural communities. And so the findings and the recommendations from this audit are specific to Vancouver Coastal Health, but they may be relevant to the other 4 regional health authorities. So Emily Benoit is going to provide an overview of this second chapter. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. So I'll discuss our second audit, which looked at Vancouver Coastal Health's childcare licensing capacity. And I'll be walking through the information which is in the audit at a glance, and you can find that on page 6 of the report. The objective for this audit was to determine whether Vancouver Coastal had assessed its capacity to license new spaces, investigate complaints, and monitor compliance for childcare facilities. We concluded that it had not. First, we looked at whether Vancouver Coastal had set key performance indicators, or KPIs, and timelines for its licensing activities, approving new license applications, conducting routine facility inspections, and investigating complaints. KPIs and timelines can help an organization to understand what it wants to achieve and the staff that it needs to be successful. We found that Vancouver Coastal tracked a KPI for childcare site inspections, but it had incomplete indicators and timelines for its licensing and investigation activities. It also didn't collect basic information about these activities, like how long it took for licensing officers to approve new licensing applications or investigate complaints. Without complete KPIs or timelines for its licensing and investigation activities, VCH is limited in its ability to determine how many staff are needed to meet expectations. We also found that VCH didn't adequately assess its resource needs. VCH had collected some information to support resource planning, but lacked key information, including projections from the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Education and Childcare about how Childcare BC initiatives are expected to increase the number of childcare facilities in Vancouver Coastal's area. Vancouver Coastal last received funding for new childcare licensing staff in 2019, but since then the number of childcare facilities has increased by 19%. We made 5 recommendations to Vancouver Coastal to collect program data, develop performance indicators, and to use that information to determine the number of staff needed to meet program demands. And I'm happy to say that the recommendations have all been accepted. Thank you, and I'll now pass it back to the Acting Auditor General.
Thank you, Emily. And again, we just would like to express our appreciation to the staff at Vancouver Coastal Health for their cooperation through this second audit on the childcare topic. And after you've had an opportunity to present, we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. And anything from the Controller General? No? Alrighty. I always like to double check, just never know. Yeah. And with that, we'll turn it over to the health and side of things, and then we'll jump into questions after.
Good morning. My name's Allie Butler, and I'm really grateful to be joining you today from the unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, presently known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And I've, as Ross mentioned, very recently been appointed as the Assistant Deputy Minister for Health Service Integration, which is a newly created division in the Ministry of Health that includes stewardship responsibility for community care licensing. So I also have with me today Ross Hayward, who until recently was the Assistant Deputy Minister for Senior Services and the Director of Licensing. And I'd also like to introduce Sue Bedford, who is the Executive Director of the Assisted Living Registry and Community Care Licensing. And finally, joining us virtually today from Vancouver Coastal Health is Steve Chong, who is the Executive Director of Health Protection, which is the area of the health authority that has the operational responsibility for the childcare licensing program. Recognizing that Vancouver Coastal Health is the subject of the audit, I'll turn it over to Steve in just a moment to walk through the presentation. But before I do, I wanted to take a moment to add a bit of context about how the community care licensing program was established and the distinct roles and responsibilities that the Ministry of Health and health authorities hold in this space. When health authorities were created in 1997, they were assigned the responsibility for the delivery of licensing services for childcare as well as residential care facilities, and that continues to be the case today as set out in the Community Care and Assisted Living Act. This act assigns statutory responsibility for licensing directly to medical health officers in our health authorities, who in turn are responsible for delegating some or all of their statutory duties through to licensing officers. So in practice, this means that day-to-day responsibility for licensing programs sits within our regional health authorities. The ministry continues to maintain a stewardship responsibility for the licensing program, and we are responsible for keeping the Act and the regulations current and for leading any policy or legislative work required to guide improvements. The Ministry of Health licensing program does not directly inspect care facilities, nor do we have any authority to issue licenses or take action against an operator of a facility. And issuing licenses, monitoring facilities on a regular basis, conducting investigations into non-compliance, and taking action if needed is the responsibility of the health authorities. Of course, as a ministry, we are closely working with our health authority licensing programs to ensure and promote policy alignment, assist with problem solving, and move initiatives forward as needed. The ministry and health authorities, along with our colleagues in the Ministry of Education and Childcare, as you've heard today, have been collaborating informally in various ways for many years now. And we're very happy to be moving forward now into a more formal structure to ensure we have that closer contact, greater alignment, and we can work together as we look to implement these recommendations. And this work really does build off the relationships that have been established both on the ground and at the ministry level for a number of years, and we'll be able to better understand and respond to emerging issues through this work going forward. In closing, I'd like to thank the Auditor General for their work and insightful and thoughtful response on this audit and recommendations. And thank the committee for the opportunity to be here today to speak to this audit. And I'll turn it over now to Steve Chong, who will speak to the presentation and VCH's response to the audit.
Great. Thank you, ADM Butler, for the introduction. Good morning, Chair and committee members. For those of you that are following along, I am starting on slide 2 in the presentation deck. Again, my name is Steve Chong, Executive Director of Health Protection with Vancouver Coastal Health. And I would like to walk the committee through Chapter 2 this morning, Vancouver Coastal Health's Child Care Licensing Capacity. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am calling in from the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Slide 3. The audit period covered a little over a 2-year span from April 1st, 2022 to July 31st, 2024. Vancouver Coastal Health is one of 5 regional health authorities delivering community care facilities licensing programs and is responsible for licensing childcare facilities in the VCH region. Our region includes Richmond, Vancouver, North Shore, Sea to Sky, Sunshine Coast, Powell River, and the Central Coast. The Auditor General selected VCH as an example health authority to audit because, again, we serve a large population, we have a large number of childcare facilities, and it includes both urban and rural communities. Slide 4. The purpose of the Community Care and Assisted Living Act and Child Care Licensing Regulation are to ensure the health, safety, and dignity of persons in care are promoted and protected by establishing minimum standards for acceptable care that facilities must meet to be licensed. And this includes such things as looking at staff qualifications, record keeping, facility space and equipment, child to staff ratios, and the facilities programming. Our VCH childcare licensing officers issue new licenses and license amendments. That work includes providing guidance to applicants, assessing application materials, conducting initial inspections of proposed facilities to determine compliance with requirements, and approving or denying applications. Licensing officers conduct routine inspections of all licensed childcare facilities through assessing compliance with the Act and regulation, by inspecting the physical space, reviewing permits and documentation, and observing program operations to identify and prevent risks to the health and safety of children. Also, our licensing officers investigate complaints by collecting and reviewing evidence to determine if operators are in non-compliance with the Act and regulation. Our licensing officers can take action to suspend a license if necessary to protect children in care. VCH has accepted all 5 recommendations from the auditor. Slide 5. Recommendation 1. VCH to collect data on its childcare licensing process and use the data to determine what an appropriate key performance indicator or timeline would be. VCH accepts the recommendation. The application time key performance indicator is complete, and we have started the collection of data as of April 1st, 2025. This KPI tracks the time from the date a license application is submitted to VCH until the date the license is issued. Slide 6, please. Recommendation 2. VCH to collect data on its childcare investigation process and use the data to determine what an appropriate key performance indicator or timeline would be. VCH accepts the recommendation. The investigation time key performance indicator is complete, and we have started the collection of data as of April 1st. This KPI tracks the date from when an investigation is initiated to the date when the investigation is closed. Slide 7. Recommendation 3. VCH to monitor whether staff are meeting the key performance indicator or timeline it develops for childcare licensing and investigations. Again, we accept the recommendation. As you heard from recommendations 1 and 2, the data collection for license applications and investigations has already begun. For monitoring against those KPIs, we are on track for implementation by Q4 of this fiscal year. We will first need to establish initial VCH benchmarks after collecting and reviewing the data after 6 months, as currently there are no provincial benchmarks to compare against at this time for either application or investigation times. Slide 8. Recommendation 4. VCH to identify the resources needed to meet current year program demands based on key performance indicators or timelines for its childcare licensing, inspection, and investigation activities. We accept the recommendation. The status is in progress and on track for completion by the end of this fiscal year. By using the application and investigation KPI monitoring data, BCH will assess its short-term resource needs to meet the demand for new licensed spaces under the BC Child Care Plan. Slide 9. Recommendation 5. BCH to develop a multi-year plan that identifies the number and type of staff that would be needed to meet projected program demands based on up-to-date information such as anticipated population growth and planned number of new childcare spaces. This recommendation is in progress and on track for completion by the end of this fiscal year. Similar to recommendation 4, and in conjunction with the short-term staffing assessment, we will use the application and investigation KPI monitoring data, along with the regional anticipated growth in childcare spaces information from the Ministry of Education and Childcare, to develop a multi-year plan that identifies the number and type of staff needed to meet projected program demands. Slide 10. In summary, Vancouver Coastal Health is fully committed to implementing all 5 auditor recommendations. The audit to assess BCH's childcare licensing capacity was timely and brought to light the current staffing challenges. We are thankful for their work, and we will use this opportunity to obtain the necessary resources to meet the demand for new licensed spaces under the BC Child Care Plan. Slide 11. Thank you for your time this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee at this time.
Great, thanks everyone for the presentations. We'll jump right in with Kyle back to his licensing question. So.
Sure, thank you for that, and thank you to Ms. Butler and Mr. Chong. I do appreciate the Auditor General combined these 2 audits into one report, though, because we're seeing sort of the progression of this. It makes a lot of sense. It's quite helpful for both ministries, I think, as we're trying to do this work and improve licensing capacity. And I just wanted, I started on these questions, forgive me that I jumped ahead but earlier in my questions, but I'm trying to understand, I guess, before this audit, how did health authorities really establish staffing levels for licensing? So, you know, obviously we're hearing that there are capacity challenges and things like that. Mr. Chong just alluded to things like, you know, anticipated population growth and the number of new childcare spaces, things that could be, you know, part of the new multi-year plan. But how, as we're looking to improve, what's the current state of how staffing levels of licensing is actually established in health authorities? What kind of metrics were used? Is there any information that can be provided there?
Well, certainly staffing levels are something that we look at carefully. We have a budget that is set by government, and we utilize those kind of set resources to establish the baseline staffing. As far as kind of future growth and demand, we conducted a capacity assessment to project 10 and 20 years into the future that looked at the growth in terms of the number of facilities, the number of inspections that we have conducted, and the number of complaints and incidents that we have received year over year. From 2015 to 2022, we tracked all of that data. And we had some projections based on that information that estimated that we would need to increase our staffing levels by 61% by 2031 and 109% by 2041, 20 years. into the future. But what the audit was valuable in kind of bringing to light was that assessment was incomplete because we did not include in that analysis data around the amount of time it was taking to process license applications and the amount of time it was taking to conduct and complete our investigations. So what we are committed to doing through this audit is acquiring that additional data to have more precise estimates to make those, to establish a business case that we can put forward to have sufficient staffing to meet the BC Child Care Plan and commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. And maybe just to further dig into that, I appreciate that some of that work has been done. It will be needed as you're developing that multi-year plan. It sounds like a lot of that work and data is already going to go into it. It existed previously. So I think that's helpful. But I guess I just want to understand a little bit more, what tangible improvement is going to come because of the work of the audit. I'm thinking of the fact that, Peter had talked about a challenge in BC. The spaces overall seems to be what we hear about the most. There simply aren't enough spaces. We hear 159,000 spaces total. Of those, by 2028, we're trying to get to 43,000 childcare BC. But I have gone through this past number of years. I've got young kids. With my youngest, we couldn't get a space, so we relied on a private daycare for a couple of days. We relied on friends and family for the other days until, for about a year and a half until we finally got secured a space. So the spaces is still a challenge for the parents. So I'm trying to, if licensing is a gap, to making sure that we get those spaces out quickly, that we have enough of them. I want to, ask about how big the capacity gap actually is currently. And you say you're anticipating that you need an increase of 63% by 2031. Is that because of the fact there is more complexity in the type of licensing inspections and inspections that are happening because of the childcare BC spaces compared to the private spaces or other kinds of spaces that make up that 159,000?
That is a question that I cannot answer. That is information that we don't collect to kind of make that determination, what's actually driving that demand, whether it's based on private or publicly funded. Maybe I can defer that question to my health colleagues.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that what you're getting at is the work that the committee is going to be able to look at together as we do get more information through the level of data now being collected through these KPIs at VCH, and certainly within the Ministry of Health. We're going to be looking to the data that VCH will be collecting through this and how we can bring that process to all of the other health authorities too, so that we get a better, consistent, more insightful level of data on what some of those key drivers are. The time it takes to do something like license a facility or complete an inspection, as I'm sure you can appreciate, can wildly vary. And sometimes that's driven by capacity, but it also can be driven by the complexity of the investigation, or how complete an application is when it comes in from a provider, and how quickly that provider is then to respond to licensing upon request for more information. So there's so many different factors that can really go into determining how long those processes can take. And as we get more data, we'll be able to set more meaningful benchmarks over time, recognizing that each case is quite unique, and our licensing departments are always, as Ross said, prioritizing health and safety related concerns. So they're always day-to-day prioritizing from a risk-based perspective where they need to undertake investigation. And Ross, you want to add?
Sorry, thank you. If I could add to your question, just to clarify, all spaces are licensed independent of funding. And so whether or not they receive funding through the variety of Childcare BC programs or capital funding through New Spaces Fund, they all have to have a license. And so that licensing is what triggers the inspection. So there's, from an inspections point of view, I don't think there's a distinction between or prioritization around funding. They're all treated the same way, whether they're private or have any sort of public subsidy associated with them, just to clarify.
No, appreciate that. And I think that's part of my question. I'm wondering if there is increased complexity and administrative staff time for the licensing perspective for those who are doing the licensing for the Childcare BC or the provincially funded spaces versus the private ones, if there's any difference in kind of staff time that needs to be allocated to because of requirements that the ministry has put on to, any additional inspection kind of conditions that they have or things like that.
Thank you for that question. There is no differentiation in the licensing program between a private pay operator or a publicly subsidized operator. We have a duty to be fair to all applicants and to not privilege one over the other. And really, as our ADM previously stated, what really drives the process and the length of time it takes to consider is the completeness of the application, the number of times you have to go back and forth and request additional information. So it's largely driven by that, the ability and the sophistication almost of the operator to be able to provide fulsome information, how much support and education the licensing officer has to provide to get that operator up and running.
Thank you for the response. And just one further question. I guess overall, I'm wondering if there is data that could be tabled for the committee from the licensing perspective on, it sounds like from Mr. Chong, since I think he said since 2015, there is data available that could really show, I guess, the capacity of the licensing. So I'm wondering about the total spaces that the license and facilities that the whether private or public, all spaces in the province, if it can be tabled some information that shows, I guess, the trend in public versus private and in the total spaces available in that time that need to be licensed, just to be able to show that, just so we can see, and I say that because as I hear from my constituents, it's the lack of spaces is still what I hear the most. And so if we're looking at licensing being part of that, just understanding that data for the committee, I think would be important. I'm just wondering if that would be possible.
Maybe I'll just say to that although we do collect the data with respect to the number of licensed facilities, we currently do not break it down between those kind of distinctions.
I'll just add to that. I definitely think that's something we can work on getting for the committee. It might take us a little bit of time, to Steve's point that it's not something we routinely collect, but as part of the work we're doing with our colleagues in education and childcare, we can absolutely work towards that.
We'll come back to you, Kyle, but we'll jump over to Stephanie.
Thank you for the information. I just want to start by acknowledging, Mr. Chong, that Vancouver Coastal Health was disproportionately impacted by the mass murder tragedy this weekend. This may or may not have impacted you directly, but I'm sure it's hit everyone, and I appreciate you taking the time to continue and be able to be here today. This is a very hard time for your work, and I appreciate the response and the efforts that you're taking to deal with what's happened in Vancouver in the past on Saturday. And with that, I'll take you off the hot seat, actually, and go to your Ministry of Health colleagues, because my question actually is related to, this is Vancouver Coastal Health. What has the Ministry of Health done to determine whether this is a unique situation to Vancouver Coastal Health, or is this happening across all facilities? And perhaps this is an education childcare question, but I'm not sure. Maybe this is your whole new committee question. But what we're seeing here is the light being shone on just one. So is this provincial? And so what have you done to see what this is across the province?
maybe I'll start and then I'll see my colleagues in childcare want to add anything. I think you're absolutely right. This is the work of the committee. Certainly, we have been constantly engaged with our health authority colleagues and their licensing programs, to understand day to day what's happening for them over the last several years. But as we look more systematically now and systemically across all of our health authorities, the work to develop those targets and KPIs will be work that we do with all our health authority colleagues, not just VCH, so that we can get that better global picture. And as ADM Boyle spoke to, some of the information sharing agreements that we're in the process of putting in place, I think will really help us fine tune some of that work to better understand need and projection, because it will look different in different parts of the province. We know that proportionally we see new facilities open at different rates depending on whether or not they're urban or rural, and where operators tend to want to establish business, and that the capacity of our existing licensing programs also varies depending on need to date in those regional health authorities. So we really do need to look across all of them as we think about targets and KPIs and what makes sense, and that is at the core and the heart of the work that this committee will be doing.
Follow up? Thanks. Something that Mr. Chong said sort of struck me about, the need for 63% increase in staffing levels and putting together the KPIs in order to be able to create the ask for an increase in staffing. And I'm kind of surprised that we have a provincial program that has, a target of creating more space, and we're asking the health authorities to come to us to ask for more staffing. And I'm wondering, where is the overall provincial coordination? And maybe this goes back to this committee we've created, but the overall provincial coordination on this in terms of not forcing the health authorities to create the ask, but for us to be forward thinking and say, we know that you're going to need some. Obviously, they can provide you with fine tuning in numbers, but how do we get in front of this and be proactive in the planning as opposed to reactive in the planning?
Maybe I'll start, and I think it's both, to be honest. I mean, I think we have to do the projections, we have to understand demand, we have to look where new spaces are being created, either through our funding or otherwise. But then it's really the health authority at the end of the day is responsible for its own operations and staffing, and we don't have line of sight, nor would we direct how and where they're staffing or the efficiencies they find with other responsibilities that those licensing officers may have. So it has to be kind of a feedback loop, if you will, and we continue to kind of look at the opportunities on a regular basis of what are their projections and what are their needs. And then I really think that's the work of the committee, is to identify the proactive opportunity in better ways, and then the feedback loop for anticipating net new needs well in advance, so we can try to stay ahead of the issues and challenges.
Can I just one more thing? Thanks. Thank you for the last follow-up. I guess what I'm also looking at is, I see this feeding into finance as well, and budget opportunities and budget preparation, and making sure that the proactive side that I see to this is us saying, we know we need this much money to run this program based on the staffing projections that people are giving us, and making sure that this provincial coordination on this program is actually going across all the ministries that are necessary.
Yes.
Thanks.
So again, we're similar thinking today, Stephanie. I was going to go down this path a little bit as well. I have to say, and I recognize everyone does great work, and so take this for what it is. But I mean, we're here to scrutinize reports, and as far as audit reports that have come forward in the 3 years I've been on this committee, this one, frankly, is pretty poor in terms of the overall deliverables that have happened over the last 7 years. As it relates to childcare and access. And it's a 10-year plan, and we're on year 7. And the answers I'm hearing today are, we're still developing KPIs, which shocks me that we don't have KPIs for licensing to begin with, let alone standardized across the province. So now we're going to go out and talk to 5 different health authorities based on Vancouver Coastal Health's work, which I totally understand why the Auditor General would pick Vancouver Coastal Health to be the one to look at, but there's 4 other ones. And not all health authorities are the same. I think it doesn't matter what issue or topic we're talking about, there's wide range of issues going on within each health authority when they're left to their own management, frankly. Ultimately, the minister responsible is the minister responsible. I do not understand how KPIs are not mandated to health authorities. We're going to spend Lord knows how many years trying to figure out with each health authority based on Vancouver Coastal Health's work, whether it's an appropriate KPI or not. If it's a difference between rural and urban, then have two different KPIs. But it needs to be directive. If this was seniors care, when the province wanted to change the hours of care for seniors' homes, a standard of care, it was directed, and it was done. Yet with children, we seem to be this perpetual loop of crisscross jurisdictions and no one wanting to take full responsibility and clear, transparent accountability for the numbers, the implementation, where the clog in the system is, and a lot of that is because we're not even measuring it after 7 years. How, I guess, for any of the ministry here, again, I'm leaving the health authority out of this because I view this as this has been a program created by the province and the federal government. It's supposed to be directed by the ministries responsible, be it MCFD or now education and health on the licensing side. But we're 7 years in when governments finally, based on an Auditor General report, realize that there's a whole lot of ministries working at cross purposes, and we still don't even have KPIs. And we're going to spend how many years developing future KPIs instead of actually just delivering childcare spaces. And if I sound frustrated, it's because I've spent that sole 7 years as an MLA listening to people begging for childcare in Kamloops. And the newer MLAs are starting to have their email boxes filled up. And so at what point will the minister or the ministries just decree that this is the standard and this is what shall happen? And if health authorities need to make adjustments to their staffing, they need to talk to the Minister of Health about funding, or they need to look at their own internal administrative structure, just as they do if any other decree comes down related to healthcare, on how they're going to operationalize what the new standard is. But am I honestly hearing, I guess this is the crux of the question, am I honestly hearing from the Ministry of Health that despite the work VCH has done to establish KPIs for licensing, we're now going to embark on talking to 4 other health authorities to decide if those health authorities agree with Vancouver Coastal Health's KPIs for licensing, or if we're going to have a patchwork of 5 different KPI standards across this province for each health authority. Because if that's the case, this is all window dressing, frankly, of saying we're agreeing with recommendations, because it's not going to speed anything up. If we're just going to be in this perpetual, we're having meetings and symposiums to talk about things and not actually just get the stuff implemented. So is that actually the case, that Vancouver Coastal Health has done the KPI work, but it has not been accepted by the Ministry of Health as that is the new acceptable KPI for licensing, and that in fact it's going to have to now turn into 4 other conversations around the province as to what each health authority would deem to be their own acceptable level of KPIs?
Yes, thank you for the question. And, you know, I agree with you with respect to the fact that we need to do a better job with KPIs that are consistent across the province. I would not say that the ministry will be looking at what Vancouver Coastal Health is doing and going out to the other health authorities and saying, are these acceptable to you? I think the role of this group and the advantage of having the Auditor General's report to identify this gap is that this creates the opportunity for the Ministry of Health, as far as the licensing component, to be more directive on this is the minimum standard that we are expected for KPIs. So what we will be doing is looking at what Vancouver Coastal Health's current KPIs are, what they are looking at doing, as well as what the other the health authorities are doing, But we as a group, the collective, this committee and the Ministry of Health around the licensing side, will be taking that and will be being more directive around these are the minimum standard KPIs across the province we'll be looking at. As Ali mentioned before, and it's been talked with around this group, and I think some of the questions you've had around, when it gets down to looking at KPIs and developing them, how many licensing officers do we need? It depends on setting those clear standards too, as what's a suitable amount of time, acceptable amount of time for a license application from start to finish. What is an acceptable amount of time for an investigation? And frankly, yes, you're right, that hasn't been standardized across the province. The job, I would say, of the Ministry of Health is to make sure that we have those standards across the province and to be more directive with them and not say, these are what we expect you to do in VCH and this is going to be different over here. So that is the work that we have to do. And that's the work that we'll be doing around this cross-ministry table and through the Ministry of Health. Might just look to my colleagues if there's any other comments I'd like to add.
And just a quick follow-up to that then, once KPIs are directed and established, is the intention in the interest of transparency, because frankly, health authorities, at least Interior Health, I'll only speak of my experience with Interior Health over the last 20 plus years I've been an elected official, it's like pulling teeth to get information. So will KPIs be regularly and transparently posted, and what target is actually being hit or not hit in relation to childcare and licensing, or is it just going to be internal reviews that people really don't understand what's going on as it relates to licensing or not across the province?
I mean, I think it'd be similar to what we're doing at the ministry now with the assisted living registrar, for example, and the licensing of assisted living facilities. We report out on investigations, we report out on that level of detail. So my intent, and I'll leave that to Ali, who's in the new role, would be to have that transparency around that reporting.
Yeah, I'll be very quick because I think Stephanie and Peter actually covered the questions that I had, but I think I'm coming from the same theme that they have started here. Is just that obviously Vancouver Coastal was a good example. It serves remote communities, but I will say that Northern Health in particular, as a health authority, does have unique challenges. Interior Health as well, but I think Northern Health, the very, very rural, remote, Indigenous and rural communities that some of these spaces, some of the inspections need to take place there. So I would hope that the consideration would take into account the unique needs of the North as well. And I have to say that as a Northern representative on the committee. So.
I would second that.
Nina?
This line of questioning has been also very, I think, helpful in the line what I've been thinking as well. And just to comment that, the report touches on the changing landscape for both childcare and staffing that and uncertainties that I think all institutions grapple with. There's reference to interviews with staff that indicate the review of applications is taking longer than anticipated because there's more applicants with no previous experience. The report also references the staffing constraints, and in fact, attention was put on staffing rather than addressing staff vacancies, rather than considering how to increase capacity. And I think section of report that talks about 2 unfilled positions, 2 staff on leave, and just these are broad trends that we see in many institutions that make planning extremely challenging. And just appreciate those challenges and appreciate the audit and the opportunities for refinement that it reveals and the cooperation of all involved.
Yeah, Stephanie.
Thank you. Nina just touched on something that was concerning me a little bit in the KPIs that were determined, which was, the time from which a submission is issued until it's completed, the time from which an investigation begins until it's completed. And what I'm seeing there is speed. And I totally understand, what's the average time so that we know what we have to staff at? Also, what are the number of applications we think we're going to need? So I get why time is important, but there's a lot of other variables in there than just speed. And a few years ago, well before you, Deputy Minister Krishna, and even before your predecessor, there became this thing in education about the number of students you're graduating within 5 years. And what that led to was an increase in the number of students who are graduating with an adult dogwood. We lowered our quality of service to increase our quantity of service. And there's all sorts of really good reasons for that and justifiable reasons for that, but what it did was show an increase in an indicator, positive increase in an indicator, but didn't actually dig down, deep down, to address why. What are we doing that's requiring these students to be graduated with an adult dogwood instead of a regular dogwood, which we now know goes all the way back to the service they're provided from the minute they walk into the schools when they're 4 years old. Some of them are 4 years old. So I'm cautioning us to use speed only as an indicator, and also without wanting to slow this down, because I agree with the frustration that's been expressed here, but I also agree with the fact that this is a very large program we're implementing. There's a lot of learning from these audits. They provided, you know, a really good public service, I think, for all of us to see in terms of system improvement, but making sure that we're looking back on our KPIs and creating KPIs for our KPIs that include quality as well as quantity, if that's makes sense.
Yeah, and just to maybe clarify two things. Sorry if I truly am not. I get how the system works. So the people in this room and the people on screen and stuff can only do what they're tasked with doing from ministers and changing landscapes and stuff. So I do get that, and so unfortunately you're the ones here that I am speaking with, and versus the ministers themselves. So don't take it personally as rough as I may come across sometimes. But secondly, I just want to be clear in terms of when I'm talking KPI, I'm not even trying to say what the KPI should be. You know, if it needs to be 6 months to be a proper KPI, then it's 6 months. You know, I think back to my city accountants days where our planning department would come forward and they'd have, you know, 12 different types of applications, and they would have you know, 6 weeks for this or 9 weeks for that, and they would present a report every 6 months that they were at 95% of the applications were hitting those targets, and the other application that was supposed to take longer was, so it's not about, to me, a KPI doesn't mean necessarily fast as possible. It means, are we even tracking and hitting what we should be hitting based on developing that standard of what an appropriate timeline is to move forward an application of X. But if you're not tracking that, you don't even know what's happening. So I guess the question I have out of all of that is, apparently Vancouver Coastal Health didn't have KPIs, and they're working to get those all established, and they're starting to track, and that's wonderful. Does the ministry know if there was any health authorities that were tracking their workflow and trying to achieve any actual targeted timelines, or has Vancouver Coastal Health truly broken trail here for everybody in the province when it comes to childcare and tracking licensing timelines?
I think each individual health authority has been collecting data to an extent and monitoring their own work along the way around just looking at general trends, how many active open applications they have, how many active investigations. I think where we haven't necessarily had consistent practice is taking that data and setting it against a KPI and benchmark, and that work that VCH doing, I wouldn't want the committee to think we're going to wait for VCH to finish that work in a year and then engage in conversation with the other health authorities. That work will happen parallel to the work that VCH is doing and with the committee, so that we can look at setting similar standards and KPIs across the health authorities alongside the work that VCH is doing this year.
And the other piece that we haven't mentioned with the KPIs, and it would blend in with education as well, if you're trying to attract operators, trying to attract potential lease space or put holds on and things of that nature, they need certainty too. Or you've added a whole other level of risk to applicants where they're not sure what any timeline is going to be as they're trying to project cash flows and trying to project when they may or may not be open, ramping up hiring or not, trying to secure leases. Without those types of certainties, it creates a whole other problem on the back end in terms of even having someone interested in trying to create a space. Because they're left to guess as to, will it be 6 months, will it be a year, will it be 3 months? Or could I have a lease space potentially locked up for 2 years waiting on licensing or waiting on confirmation from the education side in terms of spaces. So there's that component too. That's why these are so critical in terms of people understanding in the whole system what the timelines of the system are reasonable. There's always going to be exceptions, obviously. You're never going to be 100% of anything, but people need to have that certainty as well. So, any other questions? No? Okay, I think that wraps it up. Any new business? Then a motion to adjourn? We're adjourned.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amna Shah. I'm the MLA for Surrey City Centre and the chair of the Select Standing Committee on Private Bills and Private Member Bills and All-Party Committee of the Legislative Assembly. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the Legislative Precinct here in Victoria, which is located on the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt Nations. At today's meeting, we will begin in-camera deliberations, and afterwards, should members feel prepared to do so, we will begin clause-by-clause consideration of Bill M202, Eligibility to Hold Public Office Act, and Bill M204, Perinatal Postnatal Mental Health Strategy Act. And should time allow, we will also hear a presentation from the sponsor of Bill M205, Mental Health Amendment Act 2025. So I'll ask for a motion to go in camera. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. public session, and the committee will take a brief recess for 5 minutes. All right. We are back. I call this meeting back to order. And the committee will now be proceeding to clause-by-clause consideration of Bill M202, Eligibility to Hold Public Office Act. And we welcome the sponsor of the bill, Emily Rochford. Thank you for joining us for clause-by-clause. And so we're going to now begin clause-by-clause. I'll start with Clause 1. Shall Clause 1 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall Clause 2 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall Clause 3 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall Clause 4 pass?
Aye.
Yeah?
You don't have
Oh, you don't have-
want me to stand?
So, you top it.
Jeremy?
Thank you. I would like to move an amendment to Clause 4, previously circulated to the committee and discussed with the sponsor. I'll just, the motion, the amendment motion is to change the date of force of the act from what's currently listed date of royal assent to September 1st, 2026. May I also speak to the amendment? Okay, I'll sign this. I'll just start by saying I do support the intent of the bill. My reason for moving, for the amendment to change the date of force is essentially the fairness of moving goalposts midterm of an elected term and potentially nullifying a duly elected position when the rules were not in place when that person was elected. So the date is currently set to be the opening of nominations for the next municipal local government elections. So in that way, anybody thinking of putting their name forward as a candidate knows what the rules will be, and that if they're subsequently elected MLA, they'll be immediately disqualified. This amendment is intended to set the rules going forward, but not change them currently. And I'll leave it at that for further discussion.
Yes, Susie.
Just thinking about that, so it would apply to current members in the, that are in the current MLA group if it went into place with royal assent. So that would leave, what, a year and a half before the next expected election for municipal elections, and would set up for a by-election, which would be expensive. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Trevor?
Yeah, I support this amendment for a couple of reasons. Number one is the reason that that was cited before is really moving the goalposts. I know the intent of the bill in front of us, and actually I think a lot of it makes a lot of sense. When we put our names on a ballot, we were doing them under the circumstances of how that table was set before, right? And now we have a bill in front of us, and it's a bill that I think is setting a lot of precedent, and that can be a positive thing. But also too is that we have to keep in mind that when people have made constituents or made commitments to their constituents at any elected level, I think it's only fair that we let that play out, and then if we are going to make changes, it is pretty much for the next cycle, right? People went to the polls with full knowledge of what some of these positions were, and so for me, I think it's really important that we have clarity around that. I think it's around the integrity. It also, doesn't target specific individuals, which, to be honest, I'm quite concerned about. And it's gotten that way. And so I very much support this amendment. I think it's one that all parties can agree on, makes a lot of sense, and it allows us to really know where the goalposts are going forward.
Jesse?
Thank you. I am not in favor of the amendment. I think that it's a bigger question than just the date of this time. Like, when we're looking at it, there's 2 jobs that they're being able to do, and I think we can all agree that the job of an MLA isn't a job that we can do another job full-time on top of. I don't know about anyone else. But for myself, I don't think there's even the capacity to do that, and I think that's something that we've seen in the debate on the bill as well. There's also just, Trevor, you mentioned integrity. I think when I think of integrity, you're talking about the process, but for myself, it's about the integrity of the individuals that are doing the work. When it comes to any perceived conflicts of interest, when it comes to divided priorities, any real conflicts of interest, I think that concern is there now as much as it's going to be in a year and a half, and we need to take that into consideration of why we do need to bring it in. And I do think this is a consideration that lots of folks made when they did put their name on the ballot this time, and majority of the folks that did put their names on the ballot and were running somewhere else or were elected elsewhere did give up their positions there because they understood that there are conflicts of interest that can arise, and we saw that even in the vote on this bill in the second reading, right, where the folks couldn't vote because there was potential conflicts of interest, and that's going to continue to arise. And I think we've had those discussions on looking at different priorities from government, looking at working with different ministries, that there is a conflict there and an inability to represent their constituents in both areas to the best of their ability. So to me, I understand the intention of the amendment, and I understand going there. I don't think it's targeted. I think it's just about ensuring that since this is here, the conflicts and the concerns that would be there in a year and a half are there right now as well, and we need to make sure that they can be addressed by it coming into effect right away.
Han?
Thanks for Jeremy for bringing this amendment, and I heard both sides speaking to the amendment. Personally, I just want to maybe address what MOA sir mentioned. Full-time job, we all understand the bill. I think the bill set a very clear goal in what trying to achieve. And we understand it might be a positive direction. However, I just have a few comments regarding, we all understand MOA is a full-time job. And I mean, personally, I think every week we work like 60, 70 hours on that. But at the same time, there are many British Columbians actually working 2 full-time jobs, and we're not going to say because you're working 2 full-time jobs, you're not capable, and because that would be a direct attack on many British Columbians who are working 2 full-time jobs right now. And I'm not going to speculate how these people are doing it, but I just want to speak to the full-time jobs. And also integrity. There are examples before this bill was coming into effect. There are people who were having 2 positions, and I don't think it's actually correct for us to mention that those people who were sitting in 2 positions before us had an integrity issue, and I don't think that's a good direct attack to the previous members who actually sat in 2 rows. And also it is, as Trevor mentioned, I think people went to the poll, especially the riding, the voters who were in this particular riding. They knew that they have the existing council row, and if she become elected, then they will have an MLA row. And voters voted her in. That's, I think we need to respect the results of the election. We have to respect that democracy because people knew that, especially voters in their riding knew that. So we're not here to represent those people who vote, because those people actually voted knowing that their MLA might have 2 rows. And also on top of that, I don't think it's fair at all to actually change the game rule, even though this is not a game, but change any rule in between any sessions or if it's a FIFA is coming up. We don't change the rule, even though it might be a positive change. We don't change the rule in between the match. And now here in the session, obviously we're not FIFA, but at the same time, people signed up and voters knows about it. We don't change the rule halfway. And I think that's actually not fair to the voters. And right now, I think there's one particular riding that will be impacted, and I believe that's the township Langley. I might actually ask this question for Darlene. I doubt there will be any consultation on the direct impact on the residences and constituents in the township of Langley. Have you done any consultation to that particular riding? Can I ask this question?
Yeah, absolutely. We can wait for the sponsor to answer the question, but just before we go there, just a friendly reminder to all members that we want to be very cautious in any perceived direction of highlighting or isolating a particular individual who may be impacted by it. And I think Darlene can speak more towards your question, but we certainly don't want to be in that position so that we can steer clear of potential aspersions that could be cast as a result of directly or indirectly referring to an individual. And so I'll let the sponsor answer the question.
Yeah, thanks for that. Not specifically Langley, however, I will say the feedback on this bill has been positive from other areas. Again, I've said previously in regard to this bill, people were very surprised within my own riding that you were allowed to do this. So when comments are made, but will people just assume they know that? I don't think that's a fair statement as a whole. I think there is confusion around it, but in my specific riding, I will say people were surprised that this was a thing. And I just also a reminder that several other MLAs on both sides of the House, because I don't want to feel like someone's targeted, and I would first just like to say apologize if that's how they feel, because that's not the intent of this bill for me, is that it's fair and equal for everybody, and people on both sides of this House did step down and said they were going to. So just I will leave that there.
Thank you. I'll continue my comment.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, no, I don't have a follow-up question, but I just continue my comments. I'm actually speaking not to the bill. I'm speaking to the amendment. The reason there's a distinguish between that is I agree that the bill might be positive, as I mentioned, but I'm speaking to the amendment because I think it's more fair when this bill actually goes in effect, because it's actually directly impact one or two or some of the ridings that we know. And I think this amendment prevented that, like we supported the bill, but at the same time, we respect the democracy, we respect the election result for some particular ridings. So I think that's the case. So I would agree that the amendment should be passed.
Thank you for your comments, and again, just a reminder to speak to what is at hand here, and that's the amendment. And again, just ensuring that we're not just speaking about an individual. We had Jeremy first, and then.
Thanks. Thank you. I just want to follow up on the discussion to say I feel like it's not our role in this committee or maybe even the House to judge the capacity of any individual to do 2 or more jobs, and certainly not to determine conflict of interest. So I think we can set this as a going forward as there's potential here, and there's a whole lot of other reasons why we think people shouldn't have both roles, but I feel like doing it in the moment is outside of our role. So this was intended to be this amendment is intended to be nonpartisan, because in any parliament there's going to be an imbalance of people who may or may not have the extra role. So going forward, this is starting September 1st, 2026, this doesn't affect any person or party any more than any other, and that's that was my thinking in putting it forward. Thanks.
Dana?
Yeah, well, I fully understand the intent of the amendment, but I can say, speaking from my own experience, I held a seat on council when I ran, and the amount of pushback I got just during the election, not even after I was confirmed, was quite noticeable and uncomfortable. And more recently, another member of that same council ran in the federal election. And there was a huge amount of pushback on that, just for the conflict, the potential for conflict there. I stepped down the moment I was confirmed, and that alleviated some of the issue that people had. But then immediately following that, this other person ran, and the whole uprising happened again. And so I just think this is not intended to be aimed at any individual. It's legislation that is already in place in many other jurisdictions, and I just think that it's something that we should enact sooner rather than later. In fact, it's hard to imagine that it hasn't already been in place for me.
So before we go to Susie, just a gentle reminder, we are speaking about the amendment right now. Thank you, Susie. Go ahead.
Thank you. So in my perception, I'm not in favor of the amendment. I've got several points on this, one of which is the actual job itself. I think that both of the jobs require a focus and a commitment and an engagement that often one can preclude the other quite readily. And I'm not speaking from experience of having been on a municipal council. I can't speak to that, but just in terms of the way that this job moves very dynamically all the time, and can preclude the ability to pay attention to other things. The second part of it is that perceptually, and we all worry about perception a little bit. I don't a lot, but a little bit. When we have somebody who is on an elected council and in the provincial legislature, there is a perception that there is, for lack of a better word, a favoritism that could be offered to that municipality because they have a direct link, a much more direct link than the rest of the municipalities have, who work through a variety of processes. And I worry about that particular perception. I worry about the expectations that it puts on the member. And I worry about the concerns because, we're trying to work in a collaborative environment with municipalities working together. And to my mind, it's somewhat divisive if a municipality has a direct rep that's on both the municipal side and on the provincial side. And that concerns me. There are provisions in all of our jobs for by-elections for people to step down related to circumstance. When individuals step up, their perception of what they're doing in the new job may be very different than what the reality turns out to be. And I think we need to be able to offer that ability to say, hey, here it is. Really sorry, but I gotta move away. So for me, I don't think I can support this amendment at this time. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, I wanted to know that I think some of the points we're making, as the chair has noted, is maybe directly to the bill, but really it's the question of all of these concerns, are they just as valid right now as, implementing the bill right now? Would it fix some of the concerns now as it would in a year and a half? And I think some of the things about that is the public perception piece, right? So it's not about determining folks' conflicts or whatever, but it's about the perception piece of what it looks like. is really what I'm speaking on. It's not on us to determine anyone's conflicts of interest. And I think this, especially in the political landscape of just going through elections ourselves and then having another one, I know these are concerns that were raised by folks in community, even in this federal election. So it's something that's alive and well right now. So I think it is a timeliness measure as well. And our point that if we are to implement it now, folks in the community also feel like it is needed right now with anything that comes in and not just in a year and a half. And really, this would have been whether multiple people, as we said, people on both sides stepped down. If they did or did not, it would still be the same intention that they should, based on the concerns being there now, just as much as they will be in a year and a half. And that the need to address those concerns being greater than the impact it'll have on someone in this year and a half.
Is there any further discussion on? Yeah.
Yeah, I just have a few questions we'd like to raise actually. Is there any case that previous MLAs also elected officials on any regional or municipalities? And I believe there was cases like that. And was there any conflict of interest actually committed? Because that's a directly basically answers to these concerns, which is a valid concerns, I believe. But if previously have been done and conflict of interest was not committed, so I don't think that kind of, we can have this kind of concerns, but I think it has been previously done, and today right now we're speaking to the amendment. All we want is not to change the rule and respect the outcome of the result of an election. I understand, Dana, Emily, and I respect that you actually resigned before you were even joining the campaign or something like that, and I respect that decision, and I think that's a good way, that's a positive way, and your voters actually voted you in because they respect your decision. But at the same time, right now, we can see that if this bill were to pass without the amendment, we will have a direct impact in one or two of the ridings in BC, and those voters voiced it out. When they vote, they know what they were voting for. And if they were concerned about the conflict of interest, concerned that any member would not be able to capable of doing full-time job, they would not be voted those people in. Because voters are intelligent. They are, our British Columbians have a very good voters that they know what they're voting it in. So I don't think we should judge on behalf of our own riding, because every riding is different, and so I believe we should respect the result and wait until, which is not long later, it's just about one and a half year later, until the next municipal election. Enjoying MPs might be a different experience, because MP, the rule has already existed. MP would not be allowed to have two roles, like MP and a councillor. The rules is clear. So there might be a outcry because of that as well, because it's a direct contravene of the existing rule.
Jesse?
Just on the conflict of interest piece, I think it would be hard to determine that because it's on individuals to determine their conflict of interest. So if someone said, I'm not going to vote in this, whatever vote it is, we wouldn't know. That would be a decision in their council. You'd have to go through many of them. What you may be looking for is like a case where someone actually did a conflict of interest and went on, and it doesn't work like that in terms of determination. On the second piece, I've forgotten. Wait.
I don't even remember what it is.
The second piece
No,
was
I'm just
about
kidding.
voters knowing. About voters knowing, I actually don't think it's as the sponsor mentioned. I don't actually think that everyone of all voters know that folks can hold both roles. So on the premise of that, I don't really agree with that, because I think there are folks that, because they've seen the expectation where people do often give up the one role, that they would think that's what's going to happen. So I don't think we can really go either way on that, saying that all voters knew that if this person was elected or certain people were elected, that they would keep both roles. So I don't know if that's like a make or break either way.
I'll just,
Go ahead.
okay, I'll let you respond.
Sorry. Yeah, I think not every voters know about it, because when we, as a voter, we will look at the background of your candidate. If your candidate is not the councillor, at that city, obviously I would not think about, oh, there's a dual role conflict. But as the member is a council member, obviously the voter who voted that candidate, I would expect they would know their background before voting, which we all expect our voters will do. So I understand not every voters in BC will understand there's like, oh, there's no such rule that you cannot have dual role. But that particular riding, that particular candidate who actually came in and become MLA, I think it is safe to say that our voters actually know that she or he was an existing member of the council of their own city. So.
I agree that they know that they're an elected official, but I don't agree that they know that that person would keep that role if they moved forward. I think they know, yes, they're a counselor, but they might not know from moving forward.
Yeah, so let's try and keep it through the chair. I can observe that there is a difference in opinion here, and I can appreciate that. But I will move to Dana before Susie. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that these boards have a certain number associated with them, a certain number of people, and it's generally an odd number, and that's to avoid tie votes. And when you have an even number of people on a council or a board like this, you increase the potential for tie votes, which makes it difficult to move legislation forward. So that's another issue that becomes a challenge for local elected folks.
So I'll steer us back to the conversation and item at hand, which is the amendment. And Susie?
I'm going to be very unkind here. Having been a chair for an awfully long time, can everybody remember to indicate to the chair that they want to speak and then wait for the chair to acknowledge them, please, so that we can do this I'm just trying to help.
Thank you.
That's just me. No opinion on the amendment at this time. No.
Right, is there any further debate on the amendment? Seeing as none, the question is the amendment to Clause 4, shall the amendment pass?
Nay.
The amendment is defeated.
So is that just a technical question? We've got 3 nays, 3 ayes. So I just didn't hear you, Chair.
So I do call it by voice, but I believe that you, great. Is it division or on division? Division's been called.
What's the word I'm looking for?
All right, so the question is the amendment to Clause 4. Those in favor, please raise your hand and keep it raised until I have advised that you may lower it. Thank you. Members, you may lower your hand. Those voting nay, please raise your hand and keep it raised until I have advised that you may lower it. Thank you, members. You may lower your hand. Clerk?
Those voting aye, Halford, Chan, Valeriot, 3. Those voting nay, Chant, Lajeunesse, Sooner, 3.
Right, so seeing that the votes are equal, as chair, I must exercise a casting vote as per Standing Order 10. The principles of the casting vote as described on pages 74 to 76 of Parliamentary Practice in BC 5th edition, and with respect to consideration of a bill, the principles are further translated for clarity. On page 75, it is noted that the chair should vote in favor of passing a clause or a schedule to maintain the bill in its existing form, against an amendment or sub-amendment to a clause or schedule to maintain the bill in its existing form and to allow further discussion, in favor of the title of a bill to allow further discussion by advancing the bill one stage, in favor of a motion to rise and report the bill except when moved as a dilatory motion to advance the bill once again, thereby again maintaining its normal process. Therefore, I cast my vote against the proposed amendment, and the amendment is defeated. Right, so shall Clause 4 pass? So ordered. And shall the title pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Susie?
I move that the chair report the bill complete without amendment.
Members have heard the question. Those in favor indicate aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate nay. Motion is carried. I will report the bill to the House. And now we can take a 5-minute recess. All right. Thank you, members. The committee will now be proceeding to clause-by-clause consideration of Bill M204, Perinatal and Postnatal Mental Health Strategy Act. And shall Clause 1 pass? Oh, are we ready here? Shall Clause 1 pass?
Sorry, I'm not on clause 1 yet.
Okay, we'll just give it a second.
Aye.
So ordered. Shall Clause 2 pass? Yes, Jesse?
Sorry, I'm like clearly, so if we have some proposal, okay, thank you. So on clause 2.2.1, I have a proposed amendment that I don't have to share. Can I write it down? Yeah, okay.
Yes, Trevor.
Do we not get advance notice on amendments coming up, or like we were for Jeremy's? I'm not kind of confused on what's.
So it is highly suggested.
Because this isn't really overly that helpful, right? Like we had Jeremy's amendments a week before to go through them, prepare for them, and now we're getting stuff tabled on the fly here is not really how I thought we were structuring this. And now we don't even have them properly prepared when we're at the section.
Yeah, so we want to ensure that members have full notice and time to have any proposed amendments in front of them, which is why we have a couple of options here. But before I do give that option, I do want to remind members that advance notice of any proposed amendments is highly appreciated and almost in some senses required for members to be able to deliberate appropriately. And so in terms of where we're at and that the member wishes to propose an amendment, we could stand down the clauses in question and proceed once the amendment and proposal is distributed and members have had a chance to view it. Yes, Jeremy?
Can I just get a sense of how substantial the amendments are before we?
Jesse? Yeah, so the proposed amendments are just to clause 2, and the first amendment is on 2.1, where it says that the minister must develop a strategy. It's just to include the words, must develop a strategy that includes measures to support prenatal and postnatal mental health strategies. The second one is on 2 subsection 2. And that's to where it says the strategy must include measures to, it would instead say the minister must consider including in the strategy measures to. So it's just language. And then on 2 sub 3, the 2 sub 3B, it would say that the minister must consider reviewing and updating the strategy at least once every 2 years after that date.
So I'll just like to note that this would be a very informal way of providing some information to members. It does have to be submitted in written form if it is to be considered. Susie, go
I was
ahead.
going to suggest that perhaps we get these measures, written up and distributed to the committee for consideration, perhaps at another meeting, as opposed to going into them today, because I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Jesse, but we really do have to give everybody an opportunity to be aware of this and to think about the implications, as we would expect, and as Jeremy had set out.
Jesse, to respond to that particular item, and then Jeremy.
Yes, I apologize. I should have had these amendments to you prior, but I just wanted to say them out loud so that you know that the extent of the amendments aren't substantive in nature. They're just some wording changes to allow for more flexibility for the minister. But that's all I want to give as context.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I appreciate the preview, and I think they're substantial enough that I'd like to have some time to, so I agree with the suggestion to table them as with advance notice.
Trevor?
Yeah, I just thought when we first met that we were pretty clear on how we were operating things, similar to what we do in the House. And to be honest, this is a little bit frustrating because we've got Jody here, and her time is quite valuable. And we could have, there's no sense, I know that I understand what the amendments are, but we could easily have, similar to what Jeremy did last week, we could have been in a much better place for this. So it's a lesson learned for us because we're still embarking on this.
Yeah, so I certainly acknowledge your frustrations, and are there, yes, Han?
Question for me, actually. How long does it take, or do we have to stand down for today in order to get it printed, or just
Yes,
a few
so
hours,
we would have to sand down the clauses in question today, which doesn't mean that we cannot go through any clauses for which there are no proposed amendments. And so my understanding is that is and so the ones that are not being amended or proposed amendments for is 3 and.
No, there is.
Yes, Jesse.
No, that's subsection 3 of 2.
3B.
Oh, is that 3 of 2?
The only amendments proposed are to clause 2.
To clause 2, okay. So can we first agree that we'll stand down clause 2 pending further information to all members? Yeah. Great. So clause 2 is stood down. And then that means we have clause 3, 4, and 5. So if we would like to go through the rest of them. All right, so shall clause 3 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall clause 4 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall clause 5 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall clause 6 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Shall clause 7 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. And shall clause 8 pass?
Aye.
So ordered. Right, so that means we have clause 2 that is remaining, and members will be provided a copy of any proposed amendments. And so that concludes our business for the day. Everyone at 11:26. Thank you very much. Could I get a motion to adjourn? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. This meeting is now adjourned.